Hello everyone. If you are passionate about prison escape stories, then you must have heard of Yoshi Shiratori, a Japanese prisoner who not only escaped with incredible ingenuity, but also became a legend. His daring escapes were so extraordinary that they have even been recreated in simulation models to demonstrate his unparalleled skills. These thrilling escapes turned him into a true legend in the history of Japanese prisons. He was famously known as the man no prison could hold. To understand his escape journey, let's first look into his past. Shiratori grew up in a poor family in Japan during a very turbulent time. In his early years, he worked at a tofu shop, then later became a fisherman on a Russian ship. However, after switching jobs several times without success, he turned to gambling and theft to survive. This eventually led him down the wrong path in life. One day, Shiratori was caught stealing. However, the police went further and falsely charged him with murder. He continuously proclaimed his innocence, claiming he was forced to confess under brutal beatings and torture by the police. In 1936, he was sent to Aomori prison, where his life became a living nightmare. The guards relentlessly abused and tortured Shiratori every day. At that time, Japan's prison system was severely weakened. The guards often abused their power without oversight or accountability, especially when dealing with prisoners considered troublesome or convicted of unacceptable crimes. Shiratori became one of the victims of this constant torture and brutal beatings, facing a grim reality where he could be beaten to death at any moment and consumed by the injustice of his wrongful conviction. Shiratori made a daring decision to attempt the impossible, escape from this living hell. He began planning his breakout. The first crucial step in any successful escape was to carefully study the guards' routines. Shiratori realized there was about a 15-minute gap between guard shift changes. This was the perfect window for him to escape without being noticed, precisely at 5 a.m. The plan was put into motion. Shiratori had managed to keep a small piece of wire in his cell, which he obtained from the window area in the prison's bathroom. Using it, he crafted a makeshift lockpick. Since he had been a thief before imprisonment, he had already honed his lockpicking skills. He patiently waited until dawn approached. When the prison patrol passed by, he took a metal wire and began trying to unlock the cell door. After a few tense attempts, he finally succeeded, opened the lock, and stepped out. However, ahead of Shiratori was a series of locked doors, each of which he had to open using the same method. One by one, he unlocked them until he reached the outer wall of the prison and managed to climb over it. But could Shiratori really open all those locks so easily? First of all, Shiratori was exceptionally skilled at lockpicking. On top of that, the quality of locks at the time was poor. We are talking about 1936, when the simplicity of lock designs actually worked in his favor, making his escape possible. Still, the patrol would be returning within minutes. And even if Shiratori managed to leave the prison grounds, he could not get far without being discovered. Once the escape was noticed, the alarm would sound, and the pursuit would begin immediately. Aware of this, Shiratori quickly devised a plan. He removed a wooden board from his cell and placed it under his blanket to resemble a sleeping body. When the guards walked past, they believed he was still asleep in bed. Completely deceived by what they saw, they did not realize he was gone until the next morning, when the alarm rang. But for Shiratori, this was only the beginning of his journey to freedom. His escape did not last long. Police quickly launched a large-scale manhunt. During the breakout, he sustained several serious injuries that required medical attention. Unable to seek help at a hospital, he sneaked into one to steal the supplies he needed. Unfortunately, some staff members spotted him and reported it to the police. Shiratori was recaptured just 3 days after his first escape. This time, he was not sent back to his old prison. Instead, he was transferred to a place called Akita Prison, where his treatment was even harsher and more brutal. To the guards there, Shiratori was not only a murderer, but also an inmate who had already attempted to break free. They beat and tortured him daily, using him as an example to deter others from even thinking about escape. At Akita, he was not even given a ragged mat to sleep on, forcing him to lie on the freezing concrete floor. Worse still, he was often confined in a tiny isolation cell designed like a tower, with a very high ceiling and only a small window placed far above, making escape nearly impossible. On top of that, the guards kept him handcuffed all day, constantly subjecting him to beatings and humiliation, which made his condition unbearable. Yet not everything at Akita was completely bleak. for there was at least one guard who felt pity for Shiratori and treated him with kindness. The prison guards regularly checked on his health. Over time, he grew close to one of them, Officer Kobayashi, who eventually became his only friend. Japan's prison system at the time was extremely corrupt, allowing guards to do whatever they pleased. Beating and torturing prisoners they disliked was considered normal. Although Kobayashi sympathized with Shiratori, he could not stop the actions of the other guards. All he could do was show a little pity, and occasionally ask about Shiratori's condition. Yet even this small gesture of compassion became an important factor for Shiratori. It pushed him toward making a decision that he might later regret. Shiratori's suffering continued inside that harsh prison until July 15, 1942. On that night, one of the guards opened the small inspection window on the cell door. What he saw shocked him. Shiratori was gone. Inside the cell, only a pair of handcuffs remained. The guards and police were bewildered, unable to understand how Shiratori had escaped such a secure place. With his extraordinary skills, he had broken out of a solitary confinement cell considered impossible to escape. So how did he achieve this incredible feat? First, Shiratori unlocked the handcuffs. This was relatively easy for him. Somehow he had obtained a small piece of wire, similar to the one he had used during a previous imprisonment. Using this wire along with his legendary lock-picking skills, he quickly freed himself from the cuffs. The real challenge, however, was getting out of the cell itself. The only possible way was through a small window on the ceiling. But how could Shiratori reach it? One of his special skills was wall climbing. He could scale the walls and reach the small window above. Unfortunately, the iron bars were extremely strong and impossible to remove. But instead the window frame was made of wood, something he could gradually dismantle. Even with this advantage, removing the wooden frame was no easy task. Shiratori worked patiently. At night he would slowly loosen the wooden frame, and during the day he returned to the floor and locked himself back into the handcuffs to avoid suspicion. This process went on for 6 months. Eventually he succeeded in breaking the wooden frame and removing the window. Still, he didn't escape right away. He waited for the perfect opportunity. That chance came on a stormy night of cold wind and heavy rain. In the chaos of the storm, no guard could hear or see him. Shiratori executed his daring escape, and thanks to his meticulous planning, he was never caught that night. After escaping the brutal conditions of Akita prison, Shiratori had only one goal: to expose the corruption within Japan's criminal justice system. 3 months later, the prison warden, Kobayashi, was at home when he heard a knock at the door. When he opened it, he was utterly stunned. Standing there before him was Shiratori himself. The man who had just escaped from prison was now standing right in front of him. Shiratori's sudden appearance left Kobayashi stunned. Without hesitation, Shiratori tried to ease his shock. He said, "I came here to see you, and I need you to listen. You are the only one who treated me kindly. Please give me the chance to say these things." Somewhat confused, Kobayashi hesitated for a moment, then allowed Shiratori into his home. Shiratori went on to confess that he had indeed escaped from prison, but was willing to surrender voluntarily. The only reason for his escape, he explained, was the harsh conditions, the torture, and the inhumane treatment inflicted by the guards. All he wanted was fair and humane treatment. He did not wish to live the rest of his life as a fugitive. Instead, what he truly desired was for his voice to be heard by higher authorities within the justice system. He wanted them to recognize the corruption and cruelty that plagued the prison system. Shiratori also confided to Kobayashi that he had come to him for help. Kobayashi was the only person he trusted. As the head guard, Kobayashi's involvement would add legitimacy and give him a better chance of winning his case. Shiratori's intention was not to live outside the law, but to reform the system from within. He sought freedom through a fair trial, where he could defend himself, as he still denied the charges for which he had been imprisoned. It was an ambitious plan. Shiratori understood the challenges, and knew that without Kobayashi's support, his chances of success were slim. Still in shock, Kobayashi suggested that Shiratori take a bath and offered to prepare some food. He said they could discuss the matter in more detail afterward. Shiratori felt hopeful and optimistic about Kobayashi's seemingly sympathetic response. He believed that his plan now had a real chance of success. If only life could be that simple. But only minutes later, after learning of Shiratori's intentions, Kobayashi secretly alerted the police while Shiratori was in the bathroom. Moments later, Shiratori was arrested and sent back to prison once again. That very day, Shiratori lost his last shred of hope and swore never to trust anyone again. Charged with his second prison escape, during the trial he pleaded to be transferred to Tokyo prison, as the climate there was more temperate compared to the bitterly cold northern prisons he had endured, such as Ogari and Akita. But instead of granting his request, the authorities transferred him to Abashiri prison in Hokkaido, the coldest region in all of Japan. His two failed escape attempts had made Shiratori increasingly despised and scorned by the authorities. They wanted to use him as a warning to any prisoner who might dare to attempt an escape. Abashiri prison, infamous for its strict security system, was considered the Japanese equivalent of Alcatraz in the United States. Abashiri was surrounded by water and snow on all sides. Even if a miraculous prisoner could somehow escape this prison, the freezing weather and utter isolation made survival nearly impossible. Shiratori was transferred to Abashiri prison in the winter of 1943. The temperature inside the cells was extremely low. The guards threw him into a new cell, shackled to the cold floor. The clothes they provided were nowhere near enough to keep him warm. In such harsh conditions, he immediately felt the chill pierce through his bones. Laughter echoed from the soldiers standing above him before they threw him down onto the icy floor. Despair and anger drove Shiratori to resist, but within moments he was beaten by the guards. Despite the assault, with burning determination, Shiratori rose to his feet defiantly. The guards were utterly shocked to see that the frozen steel shackles on his wrists had been broken. They recoiled, unnerved. One of Shiratori's most striking traits was his extraordinary strength, far beyond that of any ordinary man. However, this act proved to be a serious mistake, as it exposed one of his crucial abilities right before the soldiers' eyes. This revelation forced them to adopt stricter measures, constructing a specially designed solitary confinement cell, absolutely secure, to contain his superhuman capabilities. This cell was reinforced with metal walls and fitted with a window so small that no human body could possibly slip through. On top of that, they shackled his hands behind his back with a 20-kilogram iron cuff and attached another weight of equal mass to his leg, making it nearly impossible for him to stand. These special shackles had no keys. They were welded shut. They were only removed once a month for bathing and cleaning. To break them would require professional welders, an immense challenge even for Shiratori. His meals were passed through a tiny hole at the bottom of the door, and with his hands chained behind his back, he had to crawl just to eat. Inside this fortified cell, in the freezing climate, burdened by heavy shackles and meager rations, no one could imagine an escape. Yet Shiratori became a legend. His plan to break free from this living hell, and the way he turned it into an undying tale in Japanese prison history, remains a lasting testament to his indomitable spirit. After 6 months of confinement in Abashiri prison, on the night of August 26, 1943, a guard approached the cell window to check on him and was horrified to discover that Shiratori had vanished. On the floor lay the 20-kilogram shackle, discarded, with scattered bolts around it. His clothes had been neatly folded. Shiratori had disappeared like a ghost. But how could he have achieved this miraculous feat for the third time, in such a merciless prison cell? It turned out that beyond his extraordinary strength, Shiratori was also remarkably intelligent. Miso soup was one of the staple dishes served to prisoners. With little nutritional value, it carried a distinctly salty taste, and salt is known to accelerate oxidation and rust. Shiratori cleverly exploited this reaction. After every meal, he would deliberately leave behind a small amount of soup to pour over the screws of his handcuffs and the iron plate covering the ventilation hole on his cell door. This painstaking process was grueling, especially since his hands were tied behind his back. Yet, even with the soup's high salt content, the metal didn't corrode overnight. It took endless days and nights of patient waiting. One question remained. How did the blacksmiths, the ones who removed the shackles each month, not notice the rust? The answer was simple. Shiratori poured only small amounts of miso soup onto the joints and screws, making the damage almost invisible. Moreover, the shackles were black, which helped conceal any rust that did form. As for the ventilation window, it was built with a metal frame fixed by bolts and screws. Once weakened by rust, it was far easier to remove than the shackles. But Shiratori faced a serious obstacle. The size of the frame was smaller than his body. This design had been intentionally implemented by prison guards during construction, ensuring that even if Shiratori miraculously freed himself from his restraints, he could never squeeze through. This forced him to rely on another hidden talent, one that had never been revealed before: his extraordinary flexibility. It seemed impossible, almost inhuman, but there are rare individuals capable of training their bodies to bend in unimaginable ways. As always, Shiratori remained patient, waiting for the perfect moment to put his escape plan into motion. That moment came amidst the chaos of World War II, when the United States relentlessly bombed Japan with devastating air raids. Power outages became frequent, and Shiratori was always alert, watching for his chance. Finally, on August 26, 1943, during one of those blackouts, his opportunity arrived. He carefully examined the weak points of his shackles, focusing on the spots where rust had taken hold. With meticulous precision, he began unscrewing the bolts from the iron restraints. His frail, emaciated body, nothing more than skin and bone, now became his advantage, allowing him to slip smoothly through the tiny window frame that had been designed to keep him trapped. From there, Shiratori climbed onto the prison roof, a section that was poorly reinforced and fitted with glass windows. He shattered one of them, crawled through the rooftop structure, and once again, Shiratori had escaped. This daring breakout was the most difficult and ingenious of them all, making him the first and only person in history to escape from the dreaded Abashiri prison. Today, the facility has been transformed into a museum, showcasing a model of Shiratori's legendary moment. The instant he appeared on the rooftop, smashing the glass window before disappearing into the night. However, even after this extraordinary escape, Shiratori still faced another harsh challenge. Abashiri prison was completely isolated on all sides, surrounded by snow. He dared not approach any populated areas. His only choice was to seek shelter in the mountains. Despite the intense search operations carried out by guards, police, and other authorities, Shiratori left behind no trace in the region. Many believed that survival under such conditions was impossible, that he had either frozen to death or fallen prey to the wild beasts roaming the mountains. This was the official assumption of the authorities. But reality was very different. Shiratori had discovered an abandoned mine hidden deep in the Hokkaido mountains. He transformed it into a shelter, protecting himself from the freezing cold and dangerous predators. He adapted to survive by eating nuts, berries, wild rabbits, and even learning how to catch fish. Living among the mountains, he grew accustomed to a life of complete solitude. During these long, lonely days, his yearning to see his wife and young daughter again only grew stronger. It had been a decade since he last saw them. He knew that returning to them under such conditions was impossible, so he continued enduring in solitude, facing the vast passage of time, alone in the mountains. Yet after 2 years of isolation, Shiratori decided to take the risk of entering populated areas, for the first time since his escape from Abashiri prison. When he stepped into a town, the first thing that struck him was the sight of American soldiers strolling through the streets. Many signs and billboards had been translated into English. Shiratori quickly grabbed a newspaper and began flipping through its pages, hoping to gather information about the world that had changed while he was hidden away. For the first time, he learned about the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and that Japan had surrendered in 1945. He realized this was his best chance to reunite with his family. The current situation gave him hope that he had become a forgotten prisoner, no longer of concern to the authorities. With renewed determination, Shiratori began his long journey from the north down to the south of Japan in search of his family. After 50 days of walking through countless towns and cities, he arrived in a place called Sapporo. There, hunger gnawed at him. Passing by a farm and spotting watermelons, he sneaked inside and began devouring the sweet fruit. But this decision proved to be a grave mistake. A local farmer spotted him and mistook Shiratori for one of the thieves who frequently stole melons from their fields. A confrontation broke out between the two. Tragically, the clash escalated, and it ended with the farmer's death, after he fell and struck his head against a rock. This altercation drew the attention of many people, who captured Shiratori before the police arrived and escorted him away. Imagine this. After everything he had endured, after escaping from the police and the authorities, he was thrown back into prison once again, this time because of an unexpected incident. After his arrest, the police quickly realized that they had caught Shiratori, the man who had escaped from the most heavily guarded prison in Japan. He stood before the Sapporo court, and this time the punishment he faced was harsher than any previous trial. This was due to his repeated escape attempts and the seriousness of the charges against him. The death of the farmer had been ruled a homicide, and Shiratori was sentenced to death in 1947. He was then transferred to the local Sapporo prison to await the decision on his execution date. This time, the guards were far more cautious, leaving no opportunity for escape. 6 guards ensured constant surveillance, day and night, without interruption. The windows and exits of his cell were reinforced more strongly than ever, and even the openings were reduced to a size barely large enough for a head to pass through. It seemed impossible to escape this time. Yet the guards made a critical mistake. Their overconfidence in their security procedures led them to neglect shackling Shiratori. He was left free inside his cell. But unlike his previous attempts, Shiratori began to show clear signs of exhaustion. As an older man, escaping prison was becoming increasingly difficult. His face revealed a mixture of sorrow and contemplation as he stared at the ceiling, clearly seeing no way out. Shiratori spent most of his time sleeping, gradually ignoring the guards' calls and simply lying under his blanket, indifferent to their presence. Sometimes the guards entered his cell and beat him. This became such a routine that eventually they grew weary of it. The situation turned monotonous and tiresome for the guards, especially since Shiratori's reactions diminished over time. He simply continued to sleep in place, enduring the blows like a lonely soul who had lost all hope of life. But one night, when they called him as usual and he gave no response, the guards entered the cell to continue their beating. This time, however, they encountered the unexpected. Shiratori lay completely still, showing no reaction under the blanket. When they suddenly pulled the blanket away, an astonishing sight awaited them. Shiratori had vanished, leaving behind only the wooden floorboards. Unlike his previous escapes, this time Shiratori had broken free through the floor beneath his cell. His constant upward gaze at the ceiling had merely been a trick, deceiving the guards into believing he was searching for an escape route above. In reality, he was opening an escape route from below. But no one could have predicted this. Every night, Shiratori dismantled the wooden floorboards, a task that was by no means easy. He dug a tunnel each night, yet not a single guard ever noticed. His apparent disregard for the guards was part of his strategy. It created the illusion that he was passive, giving him the opportunity to dig without interference, especially under the cover of night. He even found a place to dispose of the soil, the space between the floor and the foundation. Shiratori repeated this process for about a month, until he finally succeeded in digging a tunnel that led outside the prison. This time, his escape was very different. Using these tricks, he managed to carry out his 4th breakout. Surprisingly, it turned out to be the easiest one of all. This story may sound unrealistic, and many might find it hard to believe, but every detail has been recorded, and the events were completely real. However, this would also be the last time Shiratori attempted an escape. Still, it would not be the last time he went to prison. He would return a 5th time, though under very different circumstances. One day, Shiratori was sitting on a bench in a public park when a man suddenly sat down next to him. Shiratori was shocked to realize that the man was a police officer. Tension filled him, fearing he had been recognized. Yet the officer was friendly and began a casual conversation. He even opened a pack of cigarettes and offered Shiratori one. This small gesture had a profound impact on Shiratori. At the time, cigarettes were considered valuable and expensive. For a stranger to offer him one made Shiratori feel that perhaps there was still kindness in this country, and that there were still decent people left. Although he had sworn never to trust government authorities again, especially after the painful betrayal by Kobayashi, the high-ranking officer who had exploited his trust. This time, Shiratori made the decision to surrender. It was a strange turn of events, but clearly Shiratori was exhausted from his repeated escapes and the constant feeling of being hunted. This encounter with the policeman gave him hope that the prison system might have changed, and that someone could finally treat him fairly. Moreover, at that time, It was widely known that the country's judicial system was undergoing significant reforms. Shiratori revealed his true identity and asked the officer to help bring his case to the Supreme Court, which had changed considerably since the militarist era. In court, Shiratori recounted his entire history of escapes, as well as the false conviction from 10 years earlier. The incident with the farmer was recognized as an act of self-defense. Ultimately, the court acknowledged that Shiratori had never harmed a guard during his escapes and sentenced him to 20 years in prison. Shiratori's case became one of the most prominent legal and media debates, marking a decisive turning point in the reform of Japan's justice system and its courts. He became a symbol of this reform movement. Shiratori served the remainder of his sentence at Tokyo Prison, where the atmosphere was noticeably warmer compared to the previous prisons he had endured. This time, the prison staff treated him with respect and consideration. Within this environment, although still incarcerated, Shiratori found a sense of comfort. Eventually, his requests were granted, allowing him to live in inner peace for the rest of his sentence, without any further escape attempts. Thanks to his good behavior, after serving 14 years in prison, he was granted a pardon in 1961 and reunited with his daughter, though his wife had passed away. Shiratori continued working to make a living and passed away many years later at the age of 72. His incredible life became the inspiration for renowned author Akira Yoshimura, who wrote the classic novel Hagoku, later adapted into a feature film in 2017. Abashiri Prison, where Shiratori once escaped using miso soup, has now been turned into a museum. There, a model of him climbing onto the prison roof stands as a memorial. Shiratori remains the first and only prisoner to ever escape from this place. His case served as a lesson that strengthened Japan's prison security system, ensuring that no one could ever again be considered uncontainable. Shiratori used his escapes as a way to seek justice for himself, and ultimately, he succeeded. And with that, we've reached the end of this extraordinary story. We hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe so we can continue bringing you even more amazing stories.